Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a BIOS tour of the MSI B550 Tomahawk. First of all, to do that, to get into BIOS, you probably know by now, but we're going to try it anyway. So hold the shift key, go down to the Windows flag, click on the power button and click on restart. Keep on holding the shift key and sooner or later you'll come up with a menu giving you the options to go into your UEFI BIOS. And there we go, so now we've got choose an option, we can go into troubleshoot and advanced options and UEFI firmware settings. If you want to, you can just go ahead and click on restart and mash the delete key. Entirely up to you, whichever way you do it. I just felt like doing it a little bit differently today. So this is the first page. Now yours may look slightly different. We are currently in advanced mode, so let's switch over to easy mode. So this is what normally you'd see from the first time you boot up your board. Various things you can see here, so CPU speed, your DDR speed, etc. All those kinds of things. You've got your CPU temperatures, your motherboard information, BIOS versions, build versions, etc. Also your boot priority, so you can slide these along. So depending on what your setup is, you can just move those along, slide them wherever they need to be. If you need to adjust your XMP profile because your memory speed is showing much lower than what it actually is, then you're going to want to click on either XMP Profile 1 or XMP Profile 2, depending on the RAM. Generally, XMP Profile 1 is going to be absolutely fine, and then that should upgrade it to the faster speeds. Also as well, if you want to enable Precision Boost overclocking, MSI's version of it is called Gain Boost, so if you click on that one, it will enable the Precision Boost Overdrive, so that is one way of doing it. Most people probably tune their systems themselves, and in fact actually for lower temperatures generally leaving Precision Boost overclocking off is actually preferable. So if you're new to this and this is building your first PC, don't necessarily turn on CPU boost straight away, see how the system performs. Anyway, we look at our temperature. So core temp again 32 degrees, which is pretty decent. We've got a Ryzen 5 3600 in here, overclocked to 4.2 actually in the actual MSI software, but anyway, I'm digressing. So front and center, CPU frequency, base clocks, CPU ratio, core number, blah blah, all those kinds of stuff. On the left hand side we've got some of our main features, so we've got the CPU, also memory storage, fan info and help. At the bottom here we've got some other applications, so we've got MFlash for flashing the BIOS. If you want to see how to do that, click on the cards in the top right hand corner of your screen right now. Favorites, so you can select various favorites for quick access in the BIOS. Hardware monitor, which is where you go for controlling your fans and all that kind of stuff. Other things down here are toggles on and off, so you've got 6 of these. CPU fan warning control, you can have that enabled or disabled. ERP ready is your power management, so you can choose if you want to have an ERP specification. I generally leave mine off. HD audio, so if you're using a separate USB sound card or some other type of audio interface, you can disable the onboard one by toggling that across. When it comes to booting and also compatibility, if you're using this with a non-UEFI compatible device, older hard drive, different boot structures, that kind of stuff, you can choose between CSM, which is basically like a compatibility mode. UEFI is probably going to be suitable for most people if you're installing a fresh version of Windows 10 or if you're transferring a previous drive to a new build. This section here is your AHCI and RAID, so you can toggle between the two. If you're using just regular disks, then AHCI is going to be preferable. If you're setting up a RAID array using the SATA ports, then do go ahead and toggle that across to RAID. Most people I think will probably be on AHCI. Easy LED control, you can toggle that on and off. Into memory, again, this is the simple version, so it gives you limited information. Current DDR RAM's frequency is 2666 MHz, or even though our RAM is capable of doing 4000, so again, we've enabled our XMP profile. On the next reboot, it should automatically train the RAM and gain those higher speeds. Also, it tells you what slots to use, so DIMM1 is empty on channels B1 and A1. A2 and B2 are the ones that you want to use for dual channels capacity. If you put your RAM in the wrong slots, you will get a message up on the BIOS screen on your first boot saying that these RAM slots are not in their optimal configuration, which will give you a heads up. Also, again, you can check out in there also. Also listed as your XMP profiles, so both of our profiles are identical there, which is being read from the serial chip on the RAM, so you can choose either XMP profile 1 or 2. It's going to make no difference whatsoever. So that is it for memory and storage. We've got our AHCI mode enabled, as we said, so toggled there. It tells you what drives are actually physically connected and are registered. So we've got 0 SATA, and we've got a single M.2 drive in our primary slot, where it says there M2.1, and we've got M2.2. So yeah, not present in the second slot, no additional drives added. So that is what we expect to see. Fan info is where some of you probably want to go to change the settings of your fans, etc. We'll go into this in a lot more depth when we go into the advanced mode a little bit later, but in here you can make settings. Click on the settings cog and you can choose what goes on. CPU pump fan, so if you want to change your CPU pump settings, click number 1 there. If you want to change your pump header settings, click on the P, and you can change options in there. With the system fan headers, because we've got 6 system fan headers, you can choose whichever one you require. In our system, we're using system fan header 3 for our up here fans, which there's 6 connected to a hub, so that is the one we generally tend to use, and all the others should be, I think, probably set to well, nothing basically. Yeah, there we go. If you want to configure those, again, you can click on the settings cog and it'll open up into another window. It tells you fan speeds, temperatures, etc., all that usual stuff. And you've got a help section, so help basically tells you how to navigate around, what the game boost function does. So again, just reiterating what I've already said, so game boost on basically enables the AMD precision boost overclocking, and also tells you how to do all different things on here. F10 is probably the one you want to remember, which is the save and reset. So when you're done at the end, click on F10. You can save overclocking profiles using the F9 key, and you can load them using F8. I think probably nobody ever uses most of those keys. It's probably just save and reset, and up, down, left, right, enter to select, etc. Escape to cancel. F1 general help, favorites assistant F2, yeah, all that usual kind of stuff. Control and F is actually not a bad one. So if we do that now, Control and the F key, then you can type in a particular thing. So just type in UEFI, and it tells you how you can go through it. So you can change the settings in there. That's pretty handy, quite like that. So that is essentially it for the basic mode. Again, F12, you can take screenshots if you wanted to. That can be saved to a USB stick, but I don't think anyone ever does that either. So let's head over into advanced mode. So this is the advanced mode, similar sort of deal around this top section. So we've got game boost, which is precision boost overclocking, our XMP profiles, boot priority and all that. Nothing's changed there at all. What we do get is this nice mag logo in the front there. Nice bit of checker plate, always looks nice. And we've got our broken down individual settings. So we've got settings, overclock, M-Flash, OC profiles, hardware monitor, and the board explorer. So let's start in the first one over here on the left hand side, so settings. So in the primary one, you've got system status, goes through again, tells you various things. You can change the time and dates, etc. And you can check your DMI information, so not really much going on there. In advanced, we've got things like the PCI subsystem settings. So if you want to enable resizable bar support for certain graphics cards, you can do, and also above 4G memory for crypto mining, etc. Your PCI Express Gen switch, and for the chipset and also for the main lanes as well, you can configure that. So if, for instance, you're on this particular board and you're using an older Gen 3 riser card, perhaps for your graphics card, then you could go ahead in there and choose Gen 3, so you don't get any issues with the Gen 4 not working properly on a Gen 3 riser card. If you're in a vertical mounted GPU scenario, again, most people probably leave that to auto. Same goes for the chipset, so you can configure which gen it is, down to individual components and compatibility really. Also, you've got your PCI Express lanes configuration, so generally you're best set leaving this to auto, so it auto detects, but if you want to, you can enable various types of bifurcation with the lanes, so 8+8 or 8+4+4, etc, etc. Again, down to individual devices compatibility, you can choose whichever one you want. Most people will be absolutely fine with the automatic setting. Our SR-IOV support, so that is for sort of virtualization support. If you want to use sort of virtualization, maybe if you're using a virtual machine, you may want to do that for I/O support, which basically routes the information from your ports directly through your shelled machine. Enabled or disabled. If you have it enabled, even on a normal Windows machine, it makes no difference. You're probably best off leaving it enabled just in case you do have some kind of virtual machine application running which needs to have support from your I/O. Anyway, there is that. So that is our advanced subsettings. Your ACPI, so that's our power LED, and also CPU over temperature alerts. So you can go ahead and click on those, configure those how you want to. You've got integrated peripherals, so this is for VGA detection, set to auto, or you can ignore. So if you don't want it to actually find a graphics card, if you're doing some sort of mining or whatever it is you're doing, you can choose to have that on or off. I would set it to auto. Onboard LAN, enabled or disabled, and also LAN option ROM, you can have enabled or disabled. So if you've got a bootable LAN, you can use that. Network stack is for optimizing the IP4 and IP6 functions. Again, disabled is probably best left as they are from the default settings. Same deal with SATA mode, so you can change that again, SATA to RAID, so it's just another way of changing it if you don't want to use the graphical interface which was on the main screen. Hot plug devices, you can enable or disable hot plug for SATA ports, and also you can choose to enable or disable your audio controller as we had previously, again from that graphical interface. Next one up is going to be our USB configuration. So you've got your things like what is connected, so 3 keyboards, 1 mouse, 1 hub. Yeah, I'm not sure why it says that, but anyway. XHCI handoff and legacy USB support. I generally would say for those, leave them both enabled. It does make sense, especially if you're maybe adding or installing a separate operating system which is a little bit older and doesn't support some of the features. Really worth doing. Also, you've got your enhanced mouse pointer speed. That is purely for within the graphical interface here. Default is 1. I would leave it as that, otherwise it does get a little bit crazy with certain mice. If you're using an older mice which doesn't have a particularly good sensor, you might want to up that a little bit so it moves around a little bit faster, but I find it to be fine. So again, down to the individuals on that one. Power management setup, so we've got ERP ready, which is again the if you're in a certain country or you're in a office environment and you have to adhere to the 2013 regulations for power consumption, obviously you'd have to turn that on. Option there for restore after AC power loss. I've got mine set to power off because if for some reason it powers on in the middle of the night, I don't really want this particular PC to come back on. Again, depending where you are, what you're using the PC for, you can choose between the last state, power on or power off. So last state is probably absolutely fine. System power fault protection. So if there's some bizarre voltages going on, maybe you're using one of those cheap ass power supplies, which I recommend all the time, then maybe you might want to leave this enabled. So I'm going to leave this enabled, even though we've actually got a decent Corsair power supply in this PC. But again, it's an option there. Some people find with overclocking that can cause a problem. So if you're periodically taking a little bit too much juice down a certain line, as in terms of amperage or voltage, then it may actually make your system slightly more unstable in those extreme circumstances. Again, I would probably leave it enabled unless you have a specific reason not to. So there is that section. Next is the Windows OS configuration. So again, this is down to the Windows and how you've installed your operating system. So whether it's in compatibility mode or whether it's in the UEFI. UEFI is generally the preferred one if you possibly can. And also you've got your graphics information there, and also options for secure boot if you want to enable that. Most people don't. Secure boot is generally done mostly by OEMs, but yeah, entirely up to you. You can enroll and delete keys in there if you see the need. Wake up event setup, so you can choose to have the wake up event by BIOS, or you can choose it by the operating system. Yeah, depending on which one you do, you can have it resumed by the real-time clock, the PCI Express device, USB device, all those kinds of things. Probably you're best off actually leaving that to the operating system and control all your settings in there. Again, down to the individual. Next up, we've got Secure Erase Plus and the NVMe testing. So Secure Erase is basically for erasing SSDs, etc. And you've got the SSD self-test, which you can choose to do if you want to. We don't particularly want to. Next up is AMD overclocking. So in here you have to agree to the terms because you could do damage. So you've got manual CPU overclocking, so you can put in a manual frequency, voltage, and you've got your core count control, whether you want them all on, 2, 4, depending on which processor you've got. You have various options there. I would really say most of this stuff is probably best done in either Ryzen Master software or actually in MSI's Dragon Center, which I actually do like using now. It's taken a little while to get used to it, but it does seem to be pretty decent. So we've got your DDR and Infinity Fabric frequency timings. So we've got our DDR timing configuration. So if you want to go and do all individual settings on there, you can go ahead and plumb in all your automatic settings for your RAM. Same with the DRAM controller, so you can change various options there for power down. Again, down to hardcore overclockers really, gear down modes, etc. Again, if you don't know what you're doing in there, best leave alone. So you've got the CAD bus timing, you've got user controls. Again, most of this you're best off set to auto unless you know specifically what you're doing. So you can choose manual and go in there and do whatever you want in there. I again would leave that set to auto and do these kinds of things in Ryzen Master. At least that way it's easy to get back to a known good state after. Then we've got our Infinity Fabric frequency and dividers, so you can go in there and choose manually your settings. Now, because we've got a set of RAM here which is 4000 megahertz, we could, if we wanted to, set up the Infinity Fabric for a much higher speed, but it does appear that most of the current Ryzen, especially the 3000 series processors, the sweet spot generally tends to be between sort of 1800 and 1900. Some people find it will do more than that, but it's more of a silicon lottery as you get past the 1900. I have used 1900 and then set the RAM to 3800 to give you that sweet spot between the Infinity Fabric. Basically, it's the way that it's almost like Hyper Transport used to be, and kind of like your front side bus used to be. So you can set that to whatever you want. I would generally say set it to 18 is kind of generally accepted as being the sweet spot. So that is that. We've got eco mode. Yeah, that's disabled obviously because we want to get performance out of our system where possible. That is more to do with the Matisse group of processors. So you can choose different amperages, wattages, etc. So for kind of overclocking, that kind of thing. Precision Boost Overdrive, again, you can enable that from the CPU gain boost there. Auto, you've got advanced, so you can go in and set your PBO limits, your scalars, clock override, etc., and your thermal throttle limit. So in there you can change it to manual, and then you can set a particular limit that you wanted to on there. Again, I would say you're best off leaving all of that set to automatic and do it through Windows via a software platform rather than actually in the BIOS. LN2 mode, so for liquid cooling, for extreme cold, you can use that. SOC voltages, you can change those, etc. Uncore mode, VDRU voltage control, that kind of stuff. Numinodes per socket, again, all of this, ideally you want to set to automatic unless you know exactly what you're doing. So yeah, that is the AMD overclocking section. We go back a level, so in advanced, I think that's it from there. So next one up is boot. So we've got boot configuration, so you can choose your full screen logo on or off. I normally leave it on just because I like to see the logo on there. The boot lock number state, so if you've got a 10 key list design, then you might want to leave that turned off because you haven't got a number lock. Info block effect, etc. You've got unlock or lock, that's for the graphic engine. Basically for when things slide across, so as we click on something, let me see, where can I do that? So yeah, sometimes where you get things slide in on the sides, like graphical things in here, you can choose to have that enabled or disabled. I don't know why they do that, but anyway. Post beep, you can choose enabled or disabled. Often I say to people, if they're having a problem with their system, what are the post beeps doing? If you've got a BIOS speaker connected, these days we've got the diagnostic LEDs, so they're not as necessary, but certainly some of you may like to hear a post beep every now and then. Next up is your fixed boot order priorities. So if you've got all the drives connected and various things, all of which potentially could be bootable, you can kind of drag those or click on them and choose whichever you want to be as your primary bootable option. You can also disable them as well, which in some instances may actually make the system boot a little bit quicker. So you've got 7 options there, and also you've got your hard disk boot priorities. So if you've got more than one actual bootable drive, again, if you've got maybe a C drive, a D drive, and an E drive, and they're all NVMEs or SSDs, then you can choose which one of those actually is the right one, so by choosing the Windows Boot Manager, etc. So that is the boot options. That's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Next up, you've got security, so you can add an admin password for the BIOS, user passwords, trusted computing platform. So if you've got the trusted computing platform module installed, You can go into there and choose the keys, etc., all that kind of stuff. And chassis intrusion. There is actually a header on the board for chassis intrusion. So if someone does open the case of the system and you want to know about it, you can actually have it so it comes up and tells you. Again, most people probably never use that. And last one up on there is save and exit. So once you've made your changes, you can click on save and exit, or certainly you can just click on the X at the top and it does the same thing. So that is the settings. So let's go into OC. So this is basically an enhanced version of what was in the previous one. So you've got the OC Explore mode, Expert or Normal. You've got all the things in here, so your CPU ratio, if you want to do per CCX or all core boosts. Your core ratio you can manually type in there, so if you wanted to have maybe, I don't know, 4.2 on a Ryzen 5 3600, you could just type it in there directly. I set it to auto and do it through the MSI software because I prefer to do it that way, but again, if you want to, you can put it in there manually. Advanced CPU configuration, so again, you've got the AMD overclocking, the CBS section, so this is core performance boost, all that kind of stuff, global C states. Again, all of this stuff is probably best left alone unless you know exactly what you're doing. SMV is the secure virtual machine mode, so if you want to run a virtual machine, you'll need to have that enabled. Having it enabled on a system which isn't using a virtual machine doesn't make any difference. Doesn't give you any performance penalty that I'm personally aware of, so you could leave that enabled all the time. It makes no real difference. You've got NX mode enabled or disabled, so again you can go and choose that. BSS support, performance regulator, spread spectrum options, and CPU VDD SoC current optimization. Again, you can go in there, auto, custom settings. There's quite a lot you can actually play around in there. Again, for me personally, unless you're getting really heavily into overclocking and the real minutiae of performance, then you might want to change these things. Otherwise, I think for most normal, regular people, this will be absolutely fine. Again, we've got our base clock settings here, XMP profiles, which you can select, and all your dividers, etc. Memory try it's quite a useful one. If you're having issues with memory, you can have memory try it, and you can choose various different options here. So you could choose a specific preset settings. So for instance, on mine, even though mine is DDR4000, which I think is CAS 18 or 19, so you could try a slightly different setting on there, or maybe reduce the latency, go for a 16 but with a slower frequency, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you can choose memory try it and it will try and boot on that particular type, and also you can select how many retries you can have. Currently it's set to 2. Memory fast boot enabled or disabled. This one is a little bit of a bone of contention, whether or not you do have it enabled or not. I would say if you're having issues with the system, then maybe turn fast boot off. But again, it's one of those things that really doesn't make a great deal of difference. So now you've got advanced DRAM configuration, so you can go into the individual settings like we had previously. Most of the settings in here in OC are already in settings. It's just another way of getting into it. So we've got all our core voltages, all that kind of stuff. Memory change detect is quite handy. So if this is disabled, if you change your RAM, it won't try and automatically redetect what the settings are, and it will try and boot into Windows and probably give you a blue screen. So memory change detect, I would definitely leave as enabled, especially if you're one of those people that swaps parts out on a regular basis. CPU specifications, got all the information there about your CPU, and also memory Z is basically the same sort of thing. So it reads the serial presence detect, or SPD, off the chip and gives you what the chip actually says it is, which should be translated when you enable XMP. Isn't always, but generally it will be. So yeah, that is that. I think that is it for. I think that is pretty much it for OC. Yep, nothing else in there. Next one is MFlash. This gives you the option to flash from a USB stick if you've already downloaded a BIOS onto a USB stick. If you want to find out how to do this, we have made a standalone video for the MFlash mode, which you can find by clicking on the card in the top right hand corner. So we won't do that. So next up we want OC profiles. So you've got OC profiles you can select, so different ones there. You can load someone else's profile from a USB or from the ROM. 6 profiles available, so you can go in and name them as well and all that kind of stuff if you wanted to. Hardware monitor is the one which I think most people will probably be most interested in. So this is where we do all of our fan control settings and keep an eye on our temperatures. and for a lot of you probably where you're going to want to change between PWM and DC mode on some of your fans. Now for me personally, I use the Up Here fan set, which we reviewed ages ago, and for some reason if I put it to DC mode, the fans go crazy. You can probably hear it's ramped up already. It just doesn't like it at all. So we go to PWM mode and they work as they're intended to. So here you can go into your system fan headers. So there's 6 on here, so you've got sys headers. I use system fan 3 for mine. You see it's giving you the RPM readings, etc. Also you've got your CPU, and you can select here PWM, DC or auto, and select or create a fan curve if you wish to. And the same for the water pump, you can use that and you can set a smart mode, etc. So with a pump, you probably want to raise that right up anyway, because pumps generally want to be around about 80% of their full speed until you get to a certain temperature threshold. So we'll set it so that, so on here, this is our pump, and yeah, that's 100%. So we're around about 80% up to approximately 50 degrees on the CPU, and then it's going to get to 100%. So that's an appropriate ramp for that particular water pump. You can, of course, if you want to, monitor the temperatures of other things. You don't have to be monitoring the CPU core. So say for instance system fan 1 might be near a graphics card, so you could choose your PCI Express lane 1 as the monitoring area, or your system, or MOS chipset, etc. Choice is yours, CPU, socket or core, entirely up to you, but you have got options there of which is your temperature reading of choice. So yeah, that is the fan settings. Again, that's probably where most of you are going to end up being when you're configuring your fans for the first time with a new build, or maybe if you bought a new set of fans, this is where you're going to want to head. Again, if you are having troubles with fans, just make sure that you change in the BIOS from PWM to DC or vice versa, and then go into the MSI Dragon Center and then do the appropriate settings in there as well. The Dragon Center software will not change this setting here from the software. You have to do this in the BIOS, otherwise your fans may go out of control. So although you've got the sliders and all that kind of stuff, you have to do it in the BIOS first, then do it in the MSI software, at least until they get rid of that bug where it doesn't seem to translate. So that is the hardware monitor. I don't think there's anything else actually in there, is there? That is pretty much it. You've got options in there, so again you've got the help setting as well, how to use it. The hardware monitor is almost a kind of a sub-setting or another kind of app within the BIOS, so there's that. Next one up is the Board Explorer. Again, very simple, pretty straightforward what it actually does and what it is. So depending where you are, then you can go around and click on the individual bits and it'll tell you what you plug into what. So, and what is actually connected, tells you your CPU, etc. Temperatures, I/O, what's connected. Pretty clever stuff, but yeah. Actually, that is very clever. So it tells me there that there is a MSI gaming headset plugged into that port, and into that one is a gaming keyboard, and that one is a gaming mouse. Nothing in DisplayPort, nothing in HDMI. That's lying because there is obviously a monitor, and there we've got our Realtek LAN plugged in. Anyway, awesome. So yeah, that gives you an idea of what's going on the board. A little bit geeky, but certainly you get an idea of what's going on. So there you go. That is pretty much a full tour and walkthrough of the individual settings in the MSI B550 Tomahawk BIOS. This is again from version A60 or A.6, which is dated of around like May 2021. So if you're watching this a little bit later on and settings are slightly different, yeah, let me know in the comments and maybe we'll do an updated version. Or maybe we'll all be on AM5 by then, who knows. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching. If you've got any comments or questions, you know where to put them in the comments section below. But in the meantime, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.